Hey, it's Jessica with Stay Cozy Creative Co. And today I'm going to show you how to make one of these adorable bags. So these are all hand crocheted. I just use different yarns for each of them. So today I'm going to be using some of our cotton tube yarn and I'm going to show you how to do this hand crochet design. So all you'll need is one skein of our cotton tube yarn and a good pair of scissors. So usually with my tutorials I edit them quite a bit, but today I'm just going to kind of let this one run through so you can see every part of the process. And it's also going to be a no-sew pattern. So you can see that I cut out some of the fluff from inside this yarn and I'm just going to knot the end of it so that it doesn't come undone. Okay, I did edit a little bit out because this knot took me way longer than I expected and learned from my mistakes, cut out a little extra fluff so that it's easier to tie. Trim the end of the yarn and we're ready to get started. We are going to begin with a magic circle. So you're going to wrap the yarn around your hand and then tuck a loop through the center and then tuck a loop through that. So that's basically a slip stitch to hold it in place. And now we're going to do 5 single crochet stitches into the center of this loop. So I'm going to reach into that center, pull a new loop through. So I have 2 on my fingers and I'm going to pull a loop through those 2. So that was 1 stitch. And now I'm going to do that again. Now I have 2. Whoops, I lost my yarn off the back of the table. So gonna grab that and then we're gonna get back to doing our single crochet. So just put your fingers through that loop, reach into the center of the circle, get another loop on your fingers and then pull the 3rd loop through those 2. And as you can see, I'm pulling gently on that tail end of the yarn to kind of tighten up that circle as I go. That's the magic part of this circle, is that it closes up the center really nicely so that you don't have a gap or a hole in the middle. Once you have your 5 single crochet stitches around the circle, really pull tight on that tail yarn to cinch up the center. And now we're going to go into our next row. So I just counted my 5 single crochet stitches. I'm going to reach over into that first stitch from the last row, and this is where I'm going to do another single crochet stitch. So the only difference for this second row is that we're going to do 2 stitches into the same last loop. So you can see I'm going into that same hole for this second stitch. And then now for my 3rd one is when I'm going to move on to the next hole. And I'll do 2 into this hole before moving on. So that means I'm doubling what I did before. So that first round we did 5 single crochet stitches in the round. And this time we're going to do 10 because we're going to do 2 in each of those stitches. You can see this circle is pretty tight and you want it to be tight so that those stitches stay together. However, you definitely don't want it curling in on itself. And so if you find that that's happening, just make your loops for your stitches a little bit bigger and that will loosen up the circle a bit. And here I'm just scooting over that last stitch to make room for the second stitch that I'm putting into that same hole. Okay, now you should have 10 stitches in that second row and we're actually done with this side of the handbag. And so I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to cut the yarn so that I have at least a few inches because we're going to tuck this in and around one of the last stitches. Now we're going to pull that tail of the yarn through that last loop that you made and we're going to try and make this look pretty seamless, and so we're actually going to stretch across one of the next loops and go into the second one away, and you're going to take that yarn and put it underneath both strands of that loop, and then you're going to bring it back around and put it through the same hole that it came out of. And so this kind of makes a faux extra stitch, but it makes it look seamless so that it continues the circle. And now I'm just flipping this over to try and tuck the beginning tail of the yarn into the back of my bag. If it really bothers you, you are welcome to sew this in. That's what I do with most of my designs with tube yarn, is sew the yarn together instead of doing these knots. But this is a no-sew pattern, so you kind of just tuck it in wherever you find room. And now that we have one side of the bag done, we are actually going to do the same exact process again to make another side that looks identical to this one. And I am going to skip ahead at this point, so you're welcome to pause the tutorial or rewind and watch the beginning again to remember what to do. So I just finished my final stitch on that round, and I'm going to undo the rest of my yarn that's in the skein. So to save yourself some time, do not cut your yarn. We're actually going to use this yarn to connect the two rounds. So you're going to pull the remaining part of that yarn through the last stitch that you made. And we're going to finish off this round the same way we did with the other one by putting the tail of that yarn into the loop that's two away. So you're going to put the tail underneath those two strands, pull all of this yarn all the way through, and then you're going to tuck it back into where it came from in that last stitch. While finishing off this round, I realized that I actually want to put the tail through both of these loops, so that top loop and then the one that's right behind it. So I'm going to pull the yarn all the way through, and then when I'm done with this one, I'm going to do the same thing to the first one and just redo the finishing part. So you can see here that I only put that tail through the front loop. So you're just going to pull up on that back loop and tuck it into there. And now they're the same. And you should have two identical rounds. And now it's time to connect these two rounds into a handbag. So you're going to take the back side of each of them and put them together. And right now I was trying to figure out the best way to attach them going around. And so I decided to put the ends of them right next to each other so that way I can loop the yarn all the way around in the circle and have the handle starting on both sides. So if that doesn't make sense, just watch what I do next. Find the end tail of your working yarn, and we're going to basically weave it back and forth around the rounds to connect them. So I'm crossing it over from the round that it's connected to, and I'm going to put it through the loop in the round on the other side. So I'm just going to pull that snug, and then I'm going to take the tail and go back to the other side through that same loop that I had just come from. Or I guess the one right next to the one that I came from. We're only going to be connecting the rounds through that top kind of strand of the stitches, and so now I'm just going to go to the one right next to it and then cross over to the stitch immediately across from it. So you're just going to line the rounds up, and to save yourself some time, go through both of those strands at once and pull your yarn all the way through. Then move to the strand right next to it and repeat this again. We're going to keep doing this until the bag is sufficiently closed, and it's really kind of up to you how much of an opening you want at the top. So I'll keep showing you how I do this around, and then I'll chat through the handle piece once I get to that point. Okay, so I think for me this is a good size opening. It seems closed enough where stuff won't fall out, but it's open enough where I can still fit things into the top. So now I'm going to work on transitioning to the handle. So I'm going to find where the yarn last crossed over, and I'm going to tuck some yarn underneath that to make a loop, and then I'm going to tuck some more yarn into that new loop to make another loop, and then I'm just going to continue in this way to make a chain for the handle. And if you've never made a chain before, you basically are just going to pull a loop through the next loop and then through the next loop, and just continue on until you have the length that you want. For a handle, I usually make the chain pretty tight because your bag is going to be pulling down on it, and anything that you have in that bag will be pulling down on it, and you don't want your handle to get super stretched out over time. The length of your chain just depends on really how much yarn you have left and how long you want it to be. If you find yourself running out of yarn and not having enough to make a chain for whatever reason, you can always just do like a simple strand for a handle, or even a double strand where you pull the yarn to the other side, loop it under on the other side, and then loop it back so that you have two handles. So I'm finishing up my chain, and then I'm going to connect it by putting the end of that yarn through the last loop that I made so that it's secure and doesn't come undone. And then I'm basically just going to loop the end of my yarn through one side of the bag and then loop it to the other side of the bag so that it's connected to both sides. I'm actually going to put the end of this tail of yarn through the same hole that the other tail of yarn is coming through. That way, when I loop this yarn around, I'm going to tuck it into that last loop of my chain, and then it will be in a perfect position to tie to the other end of the tail. Now that I have both yarn tails coming out in a similar spot, I'm going to fold back the end of the yarn and cut out some of that fluff so that it's easier to knot these two ends together. And just a little warning, be careful when you're cutting out the fluff to make sure that you don't accidentally cut some of your yarn. I've done this before and it's annoying because you have to fix the hole, or you have to add more yarn if you're almost out, like I would be here. As you're knotting, make sure that it is pulled very snug. I'm actually doing a triple knot just to make sure it doesn't come undone, and then I'm going to trim the end of that yarn so that it's easier to hide. And then I'm just going to push that knot kind of in between some of the stitching so that you don't see it. And there you have it, a one skein no sew handbag that you can now hand crochet yourself. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, that you found it fun. If you're interested in more hand crochet, I have a lot of other videos on my channel, so be sure to subscribe there. I also do hand knitting, and I have other tutorials that are available on my website, as well as tube yarn and other chunky yarn. So no matter what your style is, I hope you find something that you like, and until next time, stay cozy, creative, and kind.